these kinds of issues. And again, I think that comes back to the political pressure that you and others apply to that situation. So I can't give you a good answer on, I know what I want to say, but I can't give you a good answer on how to get inside the head of Zen. So, yeah,
hi there. Yeah, I know you're talking about international affairs, and obviously they're not a devolved issue, but there are munitions factories in Scotland. I wonder if there's anything more that the S.N.P can do to cease operations in those factories. At least, I mean, we've had there's that great film named Pazaran, where the workers at the factory just down tools. And I know it's an international affair, but you know, we all know we're in breach of international humanitarian laws. So why would it be possible to exert more pressure and just say, no, you're not working, put down your tools?
Okay, well, let me answer that by saying, first of all, I think we should do everything we can. Let me, after this meeting, go away and have another look at that and see if there is something we can do. I think it's really important, though, to stress that it's not just foreign affairs, but defence and all the issues around it that are reserved to Westminster. So when it comes to arms production, and when it also, indeed, when it comes to industry and the economy, these things are reserved to Westminster. So the decision on whether or not you would stop manufacturing wouldn't be something that I would immediately be able to say, yes, we can do that in Scotland. I don't think we have the powers to be able to influence that directly. But I will go away and revisit that after this to see if there's something that can be done. You know, I know, you know, for a different thing completely, but in the past we've been able to stop fracking through planning controls and so forth. So we can, you know, I'll go away and have a look at that. But I can't think, off the top of my head, I can't give you an answer that Scotland could do this or that.
Just feels like the sort of thing that we shouldn't have to ask for permission or forgiveness to do that, but I understand.
But we live in the situation that we're in at the moment. I'm a Westminster MP. For these things, I'm putting as much pressure on the UK government as I possibly can just now to get them to stop that production of arms and sale to Israel while this situation exists. So, but I will go back and speak with colleagues to say if to revisit.
Scottish made munitions.
Yeah, I understand, and you know, I can see why there might be a thought we could do something, and I will look at it.
Yeah.
But I can't give you an answer on that just now.
Yeah, thanks.
Hi, Drew. Is that working?
Yes.
Yeah. So I just want to bring it back to the Scottish Parliament, though. And I've known about a cross-party group that is part of the Scottish Parliament, cross-party working groups, and it's called Building Bridges with Israel. And it's just, I suppose, in relation to talking about boycotting and you know, trying to come away from you know, the economic giving and exchange. And it says the purpose of the group is to build links based on business, culture and academia, as well as exploring and countering issues of anti-Semitism at home and abroad. And I'm just a little bit confused as to how, you know, we can continue to talk about boycott and, you know, try and come away from some of this stuff when we, you know, still have a cross-party group that are building bridges with business, and I'm just a wee bit confused. So can you help me with that?
Yeah, of course. Well, first of all, parliaments, you know, all parliaments have these groups that interact with different countries. You know, for example, you will find, maybe not at the moment, but you will find that historically there will have been some with Russia, there will have been some with China, and so forth. And the thought process is, and I think there's some merit in the thought process, is that you try to use friendly influence to change behaviour and promote human rights and other things with different groups. Now, I don't know about the group you're talking about. I've absolutely no knowledge of them at all. How they work, however, they might be really good and really benign, they might not be. I really don't know about it. But I do know these groups exist. They often tend to exist, like I say, for the best of reasons, Whether or not it's appropriate at the moment, depending on what their agenda is, I don't know. I'm certainly somebody who's against anti-Semitism. I'm against Islamophobia. I'm against hate of all kind. And I think that we all have a duty to challenge that. So, I'm sure you'll find there's other groups that are building relations with other countries with different religions as well.
So what can we then do then to ensure that the voice, from here again is represented within that building bridges group, about boycotting and, what's
There's a really easy answer to that. In the same way that if you wanted to contact me about anything, you would literally get in touch with me. So I think you would find out the membership of that group, write to them, contact them, ask them what their views are on the current situation, and that's the way to scrutinise a politician in these groups. And I think it's exactly the right thing. I'd encourage you to do that if you've got concerns.
Appreciate it.
Chris. We'll get your time, Chris.
Hi, Drew. Thank you for coming today. I think I'm going to just press you on the same subject.
Okay.
I do understand fully that the Scottish Parliament can't influence much of defence, international policy, but surely you are in charge of education, health, probably business. So my question: why did the Highland Palestine group need to take years to divest, to kind of pressure the council to divest from a country who's very likely committing war crimes? So what steps can the Scottish Government can influence organisations like hospitals, boards, business, etc. to say, look at your portfolio, where are you investing, and you need to divest, because you are investing in a country who's slaughtering children.
Yeah, I think it's a very fair and pertinent question to ask. I think the circumstances that I think everybody in this room understands what's been happening for years and decades. But I think the circumstances that we have at this particular time, if they don't, they should, and I think they do, particularly in Scotland, focus minds on a particular subject. Now, I can't speak for the Scottish Parliament. I'm at Westminster, so I can't tell you on a day-to-day basis what's happening in terms of the inner workings of those different systems that we're talking about. As you acknowledge, the key functions in all of these are reserved to Westminster, so I know what's happening there with it. I imagine, and I'm happy to come back to you on that, but I imagine that there are things that have been done at the Scottish Parliament along the lines of the call for the ceasefire, along the lines of writing to the UK government, looking for settlement schemes and other things. I suspect there's a lot of those kinds of things in motion around the areas that we do have control over in Scotland. But again, I have to come back to this, and there's no getting away from this. This is not me trying to be a politician putting the blame on Westminster. The fact is that these powers over international affairs, over defence, over immigration, are all absolutely 100% reserved to the UK Parliament and to the UK government. So I'm absolutely focused, as are my colleagues. I don't know if any of you have seen any of the work of Brendan O'Hara MP, who's took over for me as Foreign Affairs spokesperson. We're as is Stephen Flynn. I mentioned about the call for the recall of Parliament. These are very strong signals that we're sending to the UK government. We can't always get them to listen, but these are strong signals that we're sending to the UK government that we want some action taken on these things. And I think these reflect, unless I'm wrong, which I don't think I am, I think these reflect the values of not only the people in this room, but the wider Highland community and indeed of the community of Scotland, that we want to see action taken over Gaza. We want to see a ceasefire. We want to see people treated humanely. We want to see peace return. We want to see a proper discussion over the state of Palestine that means that the people there have a future with their own country, as they've been promised time and time and time again. We want to see an end to the theft of their land and so forth. But all of those things are consistent themes that I think we need to continue to press with them. I don't know how after this we rebuild Gaza, but I think a big part of the conversation is going to be how do you rebuild Palestine and give it its ability to be a proper recognised, fully recognised state within the international community. But that's work that, sorry, I've gone on a bit of a tangent there, but I think it's really important that you know that everything we're doing at the moment is focused on that. And we're not long alone. We've heard, members of other parties being quoted here as well. We're not alone in this journey, but it is a difficult shift to get the UK government to move, but it's not impossible, and we'll continue to do that.
Thanks, Drew. I was going to ask you about how much you know about what's going on at the level of the International Court of Justice. It's now several months since South Africa took the genocide issue to the Court of Justice, and there was a preliminary ruling which we don't seem to see being observed very effectively. But since then, there have been many other bits of evidence of the genocide and indeed other infractions of international law, and yet I haven't heard of any other countries taking evidence in the Court of Justice. Is more going on than we know about? What do you know about it?
Right, it's an interesting question. I probably know as much as you do about what's happening at the international courts. For me, the fact that the courts are making these judgments is really important. But I think beyond all that, there's a bit of, if it quacks like a duck and walks like a duck, then it's probably a duck. And I think most people can see, most citizens around the world can see that there are inexcusable breaches of international law happening in Gaza at the moment. And it almost feels like we don't need courts to tell us what's going on, because we see it unfold on a daily basis. When you see the death of the World Central Kitchen workers this week, that's a crime. It's there's no excuse for that to happen. When we see people being effectively starved of food and being cut off from medical supplies, when we see hospitals being bombed, these are crimes. There's nowhere that's acceptable in international law. So I don't know much more than you, but I suspect that there will be more coming out. I mentioned earlier this week about the reports of some of the UK civil servants not wanting to be complicit in arms sales. We've seen some legal judgment this week that's gone forward in a mass letter that was signed in terms of the situation there. I know that the Israel supporters have tried to counter that, but I think there is, when we're talking about law, I think everybody can see laws being broken.
Well, I would like to know what's going on with the court, because the court has an arrest warrant out against Putin.
Yeah.
Why not against Netanyahu, where the evidence seems to be much stronger to me?
Yeah, I couldn't answer that without doing further research, Chris, but I'm sure you'll do more than me before I do. But yeah, I think if these things come out, I think one of the difficulty is that you have to get them recognised across the international community, and as we know, the United States, UK, other nations have been, let's use a kind word, sluggish in terms of moving, intransigent, some people might say, but I think that's part of the difficulty in getting the pressure on these things.
Could I just make one observation, please?
Sure.
Firstly, just to thank you for the way, despite the fact that a lot of politicians are keeping their head down, you haven't, and you've stood up quite clearly for humanity and for justice, and people here and right across the Highlands and beyond really appreciate that. we're lost at the complete lack of morality in politicians and bewildered by it and can't understand what motivates them to do what they're doing. You know, it's a breath of fresh air. One thing I would just pick up on, we probably said it completely inadvertently, is when you talked about how the conflict started on 7th of October with the attack of Hamas. I think that position has got to be challenged every time we hear it. That's not when the conflict started. It started in 1948 when there was a what is astonishing is people are still ignorant of that. So in 1948, an extreme terrorist state started that wiped out villages right across Palestine and caused the Nakba, 750,000 pounds. And I've been over there 4 times in the last 10 years. I've seen this happening day after day. You know, there is terrorism going on every day by a terrorist state, and it didn't happen on the 7th of October. And you know, why it hasn't happened more often might be more confusing, that people can be subjugated, persecuted, abused, killed in huge numbers, and yet just go on with the resilience that the Palestinians show. They're utterly admirable and commendable, but we should never let the narrative be put out that it started with this terrorist attack the 7th of October. Drew,
I certainly didn't mean to upset anybody or anything. I think what I was referring to is the current military action, the incursion, the full-scale military incursion happened as a result of that. Now, you know, people will have their own views, as you've expressed, in terms of you know, that action. I've got to say that, you know, I said in the same way that I'm against anti-Semitism, I'm against Islamophobia, I'm against all kinds of things like that, that one action isn't forgiven by another. But what we've seen in this current action is a complete disproportionate effect and indeed a targeting by a military state, by a state that has a military force, the IDF, that's gone in and effectively targeted civilians. So that was, thank you for the qualification, but that's what I was referring to with it. Are there any more questions? One more?
Hi, I'd just like to say that I hope after, hopefully this is all over, whenever that might be, that Israel must never be forgiven for this, and we must always bring it back to this terrible, terrible massacre. And is there any chance that maybe the Scottish Government could perhaps open an unofficial Palestinian embassy? I know it's not devolved, but I think it would send a good signal.
I think if we wanted to see devolution attacked further, then that would probably be a good excuse for people to look. There are Scottish Government trade missions and things like that that go through. I think it would be quite. I like the idea. I think it would be quite challenging in a conflict situation, in an active conflict situation, to justify doing that just now. But I'll certainly, as I will with other questions that have been raised, I'll go away and ask if there's something else that can be done there. But again, you know, there's a tendency to say in Scotland we should try just to always look to mitigate things, and that's right. We should look to do what we can with what we've got. But let's not lose sight of the fact that, you know, we can make a big change at UK level where the powers exist at the moment if they choose to do so. And I think we've got to keep the pressure firmly on the UK government to make these changes that would be much, much bigger than anything that we can achieve here in Scotland with the powers we have.
Drew, thank you very much for your contributions. And just one question about what's happening in the discussion in Westminster. We're all aware that the United States are the key player and their support is paramount. However, historically, our country has got its hands covered in a lot of blood. And actually the problem goes back further than 1948 because of the Balfour Declaration, the suppression of the Arab Revolt in the 1930s, the Mandate period. We've got a huge amount to answer for. And from a moral point of view, does that not mean that we've got to stand up and recognise the part that we've played and how we should be involved in trying to mitigate for some of the disaster that we have caused?
Absolutely.
There's two parts to that question. First is the historical responsibility for us to, as the UK that is, for us to accept responsibility in being a nation that should, a state that should be stewarding the right kind of behaviour and trying to establish a peaceful, permanent two-state solution there, then absolutely with it. I think the responsibility, the immediate responsibility is, you mentioned the United States, is to make sure that we're doing in the UK what we can do here in order to set the example so there's less room. As I said, you've got to start from a position internationally where you're setting an example for others to follow. The example at the moment is the UK is doing nothing effectively. That example needs to change, and then you find that other nations, the nation states, find themselves in a position where they're no longer part of a group that's doing nothing, but they're starting to become outliers. So there's a lot of power that the UK potentially could have. But I won't recite the answers I've given beforehand. The pressure has to come from the people to make them move on that.
Absolutely. We can take one more question maybe before we're out of time.
I think we've got two more. We'll squeeze in two.
Sorry.
Everybody's not too bored.
And thank you very much for all you, first of all, thank you very much for all you have been doing. I think we're very encouraged by all the work, and as you quite rightly said at the start, the priority of the Westminster Parliament is to stop the trading of arms, get the restoration of the funding to the UNRWA agency and a resettlement scheme. But I did wonder, it's more interested in hearing your reflections, because it doesn't seem to be this like something that is easy to change, and whether internationally at some point there is going to be any appetite for having some international presence that is providing that accountability, and whether that is a scenario that we can see happening at some point. What are your thoughts on that? Thank you.
I mean, without going over some of the complexities that I've already been talking about today, first of all, I've always been opposed and raised this in Parliament about cutting funding for aid agencies, stopping funding for aid agencies during such a crisis. If there were things to be investigated, they can be investigated, but people need support on the ground. They need food, they need water, they need medical supplies, they need all these things. And I often say to people, imagine if that was, you can, but imagine if that was happening here, where this would be a prized piece of currency to get a clean bottle of water. It's not beyond our basic decency to say that we should be able to keep people alive with the things that they need and give them medical supplies that they need into the future. I touched on how you rebuild Gaza later on after this immediate conflict is finished. And I think it's going to be really important for lots of international aid and international communities to be involved in that process, because there's been, along with the unthinkable and tragic loss of human life that's happened there to innocent civilians, there's been a complete destruction of the entire infrastructure of the country. It's mind-boggling when you think, how I go to meetings all around the Highlands in Scotland. We hear about lots of things in the Parliament across the UK about people needing improvements to hospitals and things like that, how difficult it is. You know, imagine going through the rubble of Gaza and trying to rebuild that at the moment. So it's going to be essential, you know, at some point in the future for, I think, for all of us in the international community to commit to having a presence there so that we can help them to rebuild. Okay, I think there was one more question.
Thank you. The name's Alistair Curry, and I'd like to thank you, Drew, for being here. And the two chaps that were talking about things that had happened many, many years ago, and probably even before they were talking. In the 1930s, the Haganah and the Stern gang were killing British soldiers every day, blowing up people, Jews included actually. And I'm just wondering, they morphed into the Mossad and the IDF, and these people were considered terrorists by Britain. What's happened to it now? We've now got I've forgotten their name. We've now got the Palestinians being accused of terrorism, and yet people seem to forget that the first terrorists were the actual Zionists. So what's happened to them? The other thing I was going to say, if I just maybe moving things on, a few years back at the time of COVID, Derek and I came up with the idea of trying to twin Inverness with Hebron. Is there any chance of moving that forward?
Well, it's going to be, unfortunately for our last question, it's going to be a really difficult one for me to give you any answers on, because your history is obviously, the knowledge of that part of history is beyond my ken. I do know that terrorism's been going on for centuries and probably millennia in terms of, yeah.
Terrorism was used, I know you get it in some films, was in the 1930s.
Well, like I say, I can't comment on that because I don't have any knowledge on that. So unfortunately, I'm never going to be able to give you a good answer on that. In terms of, sorry, the second part of your question was the twinning. Yeah, again, I would have to ask, you'll probably have a question better put to Chris and his colleagues on the council. I wouldn't know about whether or not that's possible or can we move forward at this time with it. But certainly, again, I've got a wee shopping list of things to take away from this meeting and questions that I can ask others afterwards. I'm going to have to finish there. Like I said, I was really grateful for you to invite me to the meeting today. I'd encourage you to keep up the work that you do. Again, if there's anything that you want to ask me that you've not been able to cover today, or maybe you didn't want to put your hand up today, please feel free to email me or get in touch. I'll be more than happy to deal with that. We do have a newsletter that we put out on this subject, a group that you can join. I think you can find it on drewhendry.scot. You can find the link there if you want to keep up to date with what I'm doing and my colleagues are doing in Westminster on this just now. And I'll finish there, but thank you again for the invite. Thank you.
Thank you very much indeed, Drew, and I can confirm I did my homework before today's meeting, and on the 11th of April 2023 in the House of Commons, Drew asked the Foreign Minister, will she also carry that forward into forthcoming trade deal discussions? Will she stop the export of equipment and arms proven to be repeatedly used in settlement expansion, and will she do it now? So that's a quote. Well, I think there's proof in that statement and in all the work that Drew does that he does follow up on every point that he's asked. I was involved for many years and still am with campaigns against nuclear weapons and nuclear power. And Drew was leader of the council in 2012 to 15. He might not remember this, but I went to speak to him and said, could he stop or could he do something to stop the transport of nuclear waste from Dounreay to Sellafield. Now, Highland Council is fiercely pro-nuclear because of the jobs provided, over 1,000 jobs up at Dounreay. But despite that, he supported our campaign because he could see the risks involved. So I think he goes against the grain many times. He also lifted the mace in the House of Commons on one occasion.